3, 2, 1, and we are live, I think. It's making sure that YouTube is seeing us. Yes. Okay, here we are. Good. We missed the beautiful bit of you telling off Bill. You can do that again, or we can continue.
I'm sure there'll be more opportunities.
All right, fair enough. So first of all, I have to say, I feel like you know me, but I don't know you, because I only met you for the first time when you bravely volunteered to be part of the DBJ pilot, but it sounds like you had been following my blog for some time.
Yeah, I've just been quietly stalking you. It's fine.
It's fine. I'm actually like astonished that I've achieved the level of being stalked, because I never actually expect anyone to read my blog. I wrote it really as an act in therapy, and I've had 3 people contact me based on my blog, all of whom were from the UK, and the first 2 actually knew each other. So there's a good chance the third, you probably know them too. I can't remember their names offhand, but.
Oh, I'm really intrigued now.
So when did you, how did you find the blog, and what kind of got you hooked? I can ask that.
Oh, really? You want to spend our time doing that? We can do.
Well, I want to know what, like, I have to feel like I have to get myself out of this information asymmetry that I'm in.
Oh, but no, I'm a woman of mystery. So I have known Bill for about longer than 18 months now. And he was telling me about this group that he went to, and would tell me no details because privacy and confidentiality, but would tell me how fascinating it was to have this group of people who were doing Bible study and discipleship and church in a different way. And so I started watching the DBJ TGR.
Great Reset predecessor. Okay,
yeah.
DBJ. Okay, so you're in the vast group of people who only know me because Bill said you should, because virtually everyone else except Robbie, I think, is in that category. So that begs the question, how do you know Bill?
Through online community.
Which will remain unnamed?
It's the Peter Rollins Prior Theology.
Okay.
So
excellent.
Yeah, it's one of Bill's many groups.
He is quite the connector.
Yes, he is.
All right, that's enough background. I feel like I have some frame of reference. Now, up to you.
Well, I sort of felt the need to apologize to start with, to say, but then thought to myself before I even got that far as to how I was going to apologize. I just decided that it was all your fault, because you were the one that decided to start talking about things that are in my area of interest, and that I happen to know a little bit about. And so, yeah, you basically had this coming.
No, in fact, this is precisely why I have this performative knowledge quest. I have a friend who says that there are 3 things you can have. You can have bits, clue, or vision. Bits is the information about something, clue is understanding how to solve the problem, and vision is a sense of where you want to get to. And he says you can have at most 3 of those. So I think of myself as the person who has vision and clue, but no bits. And so I say, hey, I think we could solve this problem like this because we're trying to create this future. And then the people who actually know something about it and say, I'm not so sure about that. It's like, okay, great, let's have a dialogue, because it's possible that, there's something really critical I'm missing. It's possible that I'm fundamentally right and that I'm not framing it properly. Or it could be that, like, oh yeah, this is a really stupid idea for these well-known reasons. And I really don't know, in some sense, I also even don't care which one it is, because now that I have this out there, it attracts, and I told you online, it's one of my favorite quotes, is that thoughtful criticism is the sincerest form of flattery. So
I don't agree with that, but that's fine. Like, I'm happy to go with that for now. So I guess my first question is, if you had to give an elevator pitch of your question, so 10 seconds or less, what is it that you're visioning and questioning right now?
So let me cheat and put up the 2 slides that I wrote since there, because it helps me organize my thoughts. And it may or may not answer your question, but we'll start with the answers I have and then iterate till we find the right question. So I think the first point I wanted to make, and this is why this is more like philosophy than psychology, is that existence is tension. And I've been reading and listening to philosophy on the Partially Examined Life podcast and occasionally some actual readings. And it feels like this is the fundamental insight I want to start from, is that to exist is to be in tension, and rather than trying to reduce everything in some direction which resolves the tension. And then the second point, which Bill's questions helped me frame, is that avoiding tension is therefore maladaptive. And I'm almost willing to make the strong claim that maladaptivity is precisely avoiding tension, though I'm not quite ready to go there yet. But that's kind of where I'm coming from, is that like, okay, there's all these, and so the goal is something, let's call it adaptivity, or being adaptive, which is that being able to function effectively within one's environment to achieve one's goals. And that,
excellent.
And that's
so having said all of that, which takes a couple of minutes,
yeah,
focus it, because if we have a focused thought, then we can
sorry, I lost the second half of your sentence.
There wasn't one really.
Oh.
So if we have a focused thought, then we know exactly what it is, because you're a scientist. You don't go into a study with a long-winded hypothesis. You have to have a hypothesis that you can test and you can either reject or accept.
Ah, okay. That is a, let me reframe that using my terminology to see if I can understand what you're getting at. Okay. The way that I conceive being a scientist is that first you have sort of an epiphany that you could look at the world a certain way. And then secondly, you create kind of an abstract model of what that means. And then you reify that into a formal theory, which can then be used to generate testable hypotheses.
Yeah.
So I'm at the stage that I have this epiphany, which is this thing there, and I am in the process of turning that into a conceptual model. And I don't yet have something that I would dignify as a theory.
Okay.
I have some things that might turn into that, which I'm happy to discuss with you, but that kind of gives you a sense for where I see myself in this progression.
Okay. And so at the moment, this is around tension being at the heart of existence.
Right, so that's kind of the philosophy piece of it, is that it is this idea of tension. And then the closest thing I have to a model at this point in time is this idea of roles.
Yeah.
And so that's currently what I'm playing with, is this conceptual model of roles. It's not yet something I would, I feel like there's a there, but I don't know if I've actually formalized it properly.
Completely agree with you.
Okay.
So
right now I'm sort of having fun playing with this concept of roles and seeing how much generativity it has.
Yeah.
So I have a fun, since we're in here, this is the other slide I threw in since last time, which I've had a great deal of fun with, which is that, I've got this chart here of the martyr, boss, performer, artist. And it occurs to me that well, if you have a martyr boss, that's like a servant leader. And if you have a performer artist, that's like a singer-songwriter, which are really interesting phrases that are part of our lexicon because they are powerful when you can find them. And I think they're valued just because they are rare. And to me, having done a little bit of both of these things, I very much feel that as inhabiting two different roles that I switch between. And that's interesting. The other fun one is that, okay, so we go there, what's the artist boss? And this may be my Apple bias, but that's what I think of as a founder, as someone who sort of disconnects is disconnecting from the other to figure out what's really important, and then de-individuates the other to impose their will on the world. And then the flip side of that would be the martyr performer, which, for lack of a better term, I'm calling the saint. And then on the diagonals, again, this may be a failure of imagination on my part, but when I see those together, the performer boss, I think of in a very negative term as a narcissist, and the martyr artist as a victim. And again, this is all sort of off the top of my head, just playing with the generativity of the idea. I don't know how robust these formalisms are, but they are certainly amusing.
Yes. Okay.
Okay, and that's as far as I've got since we last talked. So you're caught up on my latest thinking.
Great. So if we go back to slide 2.
Here?
Yeah. Yeah. So I really like this idea that existence is tension. Like I see tension in the entirety of existence.
Yes.
And no matter what you look at, whether you look at like Heisenberg uncertainty principle, it's a tension. You have one or the other. You have just this tension that you want to draw people close to you, but you want to push them away. Like no matter what you do, there's always something.
Atoms want to have their shells filled, but they also want to be neutral.
Yes, exactly. So you need tension, and part of tension is uncertainty, and there is uncertainty in everything in life. And I really like this idea that if you have complete balance of everything, so a lack of tension, there is pure stasis. And if you have pure stasis, then everything dies.
Yeah. In fact, you can often define the non-existence of an entity when it as the absence of tension.
Yeah. And actually, even if you look at God, God is 3 in 1. There is a tension there. It's a healthy tension. It's a very good tension, but it's a tension. Like you have 3 individual entities, but one. And how does that work? And, you look at our understanding of God, and God is merciful, God is just, God is near, but he's far. He's, all of these things. And you just think, well, how is that possible? And it's that kind of sparks creativity, curiosity, wonder, and it sparks all of those positive things in health. And then in unhealth, it sparks the anxiety, stress, discomfort, fear. And so, yes, absolutely, I completely agree with you that it's our ability to handle tension that is at the heart of how well we grow and develop and everything else.
Right. Some other time, I have a hierarchy of existence. And when I came to it, it's sort of surprising to me, I had just being at the bottom and then sort of perceiving and desiring and so forth. And at the top, surprisingly to me at least, I came up with becoming as the highest stage of existence, which is very different than the way I was raised to think about God as a state of pure being. But now that definitely fits with how I experience God in reality, is to be God is in some sense to be in a state of pure becoming.
Yeah. Which is why I like slide 3, but I also disagree with it. because I think what you have described there is one form of maladaptation, but it isn't you could go deeper, because I think it's the lack of skills to handle tension that's the problem. And like in the same way that money isn't the root of all evil, love of money is the root of all evil. Money in itself is a neutral resource, and it can be abundant, scarce, used well, used poorly. And in the same way, tension in and of itself is a thing. It's neutral. But the way we handle it can either make it a force for good or a force for evil.
Right. So sorry, this is something that was not clear the first time around, which I hoped was clear the second time around, which is that, as Bill pointed out, it sounded like I was making tension the bogeyman. Is that tension's the problem?
No.
And right. So clearly, like tension itself is, I would argue, actually a positive good, because existence is better than non-existence, but we can set that aside for now. To me, the thing that is maladaptive is avoiding tension precisely. And there could be many reasons and ways we avoid tension, but in some sense, avoiding tension rather than, I don't know what the opposite verb is yet, handling it properly, I guess. Handling tension properly is by definition adaptation, and avoiding it is sort of by definition maladaptive then.
So I suppose
something which I actually disagree with.
Yeah, so what I guess I disagree with is the use of the word avoiding, because for me, avoiding has a particular connotation, which is that you run from it.
Yes.
Whereas I think the other way of handling it is to try and force a resolution. So you still remove it, but you remove it by trying to override it, which is like boss.
Okay, got you. And previously I used the term escaping, which was trying to handle the idea of like you're trying to get away from it. Do you prefer that to avoiding?
Well, no, because that still sounds like removing yourself. So if you think
escaping can be either removing. Okay, so when I use those words, you have the connotation of removing myself from the tension. Well, so I would argue is that if I try to push the tension away from me by like forcing it into thing, I'm not actually getting rid of it. I'm just externalizing the tension and shoving it into elsewhere in the system. And so that's what I mean by avoiding or escaping, as sort of both withdrawal and externalizing.
Except in your slide 5, what you do is you've got 2 examples of the way that self relieves tension by disconnecting, which is removing yourself from the connection, or de-individuating, which is removing the connection from yourself by internalizing it, in effect. So a martyr doesn't escape tension by saying, I'm going to run away from it. It says there's no tension because I'm just going to accept everything. I'm not going to fight everything. I'm just going to internalize it. And so there is no tension. And that's not escaping. That's being an active actor on it.
So let me clarify one point and then see if your critique still holds true. In slide 3, I'm definitely using a pejorative word, maladaptive.
Yeah.
Right? Okay. But in slide 5, I'm very much using relieve as a neutral term. Is that these roles can be either adaptive or maladaptive, as we discussed later. And so I guess I'm not quite clear on the basis of your objection.
I suppose, right. If, let's say, you think of a conflict, think of a tension.
Okay. you're disagreeing with me right now. You think you're disagreeing with me.
Yeah, okay.
And I'm not sure
So-
you are. There's a tension there.
Yeah, so if there's a tension between us, we're having this conversation. The one option is to withdraw and to say, okay, no, maybe you're right. And I don't agree with you, but I'm removing myself from the argument. I'm withdrawing and removing my presence from the tension, which is what I understand by avoidance.
So that's I think that's actually the point I am trying to make, is roles are good tactics, but bad strategies. Because in different contexts, depending on how emotional a given question or issue is, sometimes the right tactic is to withdraw from that situation, not to avoid it entirely. That would, well, actually, some issues you are better off just walking away. That is the right adaptive response, is to say there is no way we can resolve this, okay? But in this case, it is not the most, but I think we have enough trust and shared context and good feeling that we have a hope of creating a constructive resolution to this.
Yeah.
And therefore, it would be better to, actually, you know what I think actually happens in practice is that when we're healthy in this conversation, we're bouncing around these different roles. Sometimes I'm like, dude, you got to just face it this way. It's like, whoa, okay, let me just step back and try to understand you. And if we're both doing those in equal measures, I think we'll have a constructive conversation. We sort of have micro roles, if you will, where we do these things in small bits. And that's what leads us to a productive outcome.
So sticking with the maladaptive just for a moment,
okay,
because I want to focus on slide 3. When you say avoiding, that makes me think of that example of prematurely agreeing when, or, you know, appearing to agree when you don't, or accepting the other person's point of view without actually agreeing. Whereas the opposite maladaptive response that is also maladaptive, but it's opposite, is to try and force your side onto the other person. So it's saying, well, there is a tension between A and B. A is clearly right. And I'm not going to listen to B, and I'm not going to have any interest in B. B is pointless. Let's ignore it. Right, but that's not avoiding, that's actively crushing the tension.
Okay, so I think we have the same concept, is that maladaptive behavior includes both trying to run away from the tension or trying to surround it and crush it.
Yeah, the problem is you're talking psychologically, and psychologically avoiding has a very specific meaning. Okay,
so that's fine. That's the problem of languaging. But now that we agree that we share the same concept, help me find my friends and I use the term semantics and syntax. The semantics is the thing we need. The syntax is the way we encode it. So it's like, okay, you and I have the same semantic here. Now help me find a better syntax that works for you.
Yeah, is the philosophical term of form and content.
Sorry?
Form versus content.
Sure.
Yeah.
Right. Syntax mapping as we go through these languaging exercises. So what can you think of a word that includes both the yin and the yang, if you will, of
prematurely resolving, because it's not actually resolved. It's
so maybe premature. I used to use the word relieve, but really resolving, relieving. It's just the problem I have with the phrase premature resolving is I want to use the resolving to describe the healthy thing.
I know, but I'm going to argue with that too.
That way.
Because I don't think you do resolve the tension.
Right. Premature release, not because release again has the sort of the yin rather than the yang, even if I'm using them backwards, you know what I mean, right?
Yes.
detensioning. It's kind of what's happening, right? It's premature detensioning.
Yeah.
Let's go with that for now. It's a little awkward, but it evolves it avoids the. Now, are you willing with this to give us the stronger statement? Maladaptation, is the converse also true? The maladaptation is premature detensioning.
Really sorry, I'm picky. You missed an N.
Oh, thank you. Ooh, shared collaboration. Exercising your hidden superpowers.
I'd have to think about it. I want to say yes, but I don't feel that I can quite say yes without thinking about it further.
All right. It's clunky, but it's accurate and captures our respective syntax and semantics and.
Or it's the inability to hold tension.
Right, but I don't want to actually overly, you want to have the ability to hold tension long enough, right? So there's such a thing as being indecisive.
Well, that's also a form of avoidance.
That's true, it's avoiding something else. You're right. So there is holding one tension to the neglect of another one, perhaps, and that's where it gets a little more complicated. So,
but that's just another tension,
right?
And that's avoiding ongoing tension,
right? But we're not using the word avoidance, so.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So anyway, all right. We're going to avoid avoidance for now. This is delightful, by the way.
Yeah. So do you want to go to 4?
Sure.
Because I do have to go on the hour pretty much exactly.
Okay.
So we'll get through as much as we can, but I really like the later ones, so it's good. I like this because regardless of, because you said that you wanted this to be decoupled from religiosity, and I like that idea. And so we know from developmental psychology that the primary drive for humans is human connection. Well, and we know even in animal studies, if you look at Bowlby's attachment theories, that animals will try and form attachment with anything that they see as a mother figure. So we know that
so at least maternal animals, right? Insects don't necessarily attach to mother figures. Not all.
Well, we don't know that. We just haven't studied them. So
no, there are some insects where we know that the mother leaves the egg and then dies, right? And there is no attachment to a mother figure.
Fair enough. Yes.
But certainly among most vertebrates.
Yeah, so mammals.
Yeah. Certainly mammals and birds.
Yeah.
Mammals and birds at least, and maybe some reptiles.
But do you know about Bowen and his differentiation stuff?
Bowen, B-O-W-E-N.
Yeah.
Oh yes, that was the self-differentiation is a term that I've been trying to define for the last couple of years, and this is basically my attempt to define self-differentiation.
So he's got a really fantastic, he's got 8 principles, but there's one that is really great about triangles and the idea of triangles. and that any relationship that you have between two people will try and involve a third to try and release the tension, because having two people in tension can often be too much. And so having the movement opportunity of a third is helpful.
Right. In fact, that was very much the impetus for this slide deck, is that I was feeling this discomfort, and I realized, oh, it's because I feel like people are trying to triangulate with me. And I'm trying to figure, okay, so what is the thing that causes that? And I resolved that into, oh, because they make this statement like a political statement, and they expect me to agree with them. Like, isn't that person being a jerk or foolish or whatever? And it's like, I don't want to go there, but I don't want to, but then I respond by making some snarky comment, which they do not appreciate. And it's like, okay, why is this so hard? And the
because when you have conflict between two people, being the third outside position is the desirable position.
Right.
And the whole point is you don't resolve that. It's an ongoing dance between the people that doesn't get resolved, because if you were to respond and say, oh yeah, blah, 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 then the person that you're talking about takes the desirable out position. You've then formed an isosceles triangle with them on the outside, and then inevitably tension grows between the two people on the inside, and then one of them tries to form a connection with the outside person again. And so there's this constant shifting of relationship dynamics, but it's never resolved. There is never a point where you have a completely equilateral triangle.
Right. I was trying to solve a simpler problem, which may be harder, which is that I have a friend who's trying to triangulate, and they want to invite me into this triangle, and I don't want to go there. But my efforts to articulate that end up being non-constructive. So I've been trying to wrestle with the question, which I haven't yet fully answered, but I feel like I'm getting closer to, which is, what is the constructive alternative to either, aligning with them on one side of the triangle or aligning with the other on the other side of the triangle?
Yeah.
Right. And so I don't know the answer to that yet, but I know the reason it's hard, I think, is because, and I think that's kind of the whole point of this, is that I'm trying to at least describe the problem in constructive terms. And like, this is the problem. It's like, oh, okay, the reason this is hard is because I want to connect with this person because I care about them. They're a friend, but I also want to maintain my individuality. I don't want to be de-individuated into being stuck with their anger or their disgust, or worse, or equally bad, maybe being the object of their anger and disgust by picking the other side. And so that is the dilemma I am facing. And it is helpful just to understand that as what's going on. And then it points to, which we may get into in the later slides, possible ways of resolving it in a more productive fashion.
So for Bowen, the answer is self-differentiation, because what you've basically described is a difficulty of a conflict between the expectations of someone else and your own internal values and desires.
Right. So here's my critique of Bowen, right, is the way that he pulled this off in his seminal paper on family therapy and self-differentiation was by manipulative control. He played his family like a violin in order to get them to detriangulate. And I admire him deeply for doing so, because it was really, really hard. And like, survival requires hard things. But it's like, okay, I can admire that because he was trying to do this for the first time. He had no framework, no logic, no guideposts, anything. It's like, okay, great. Now I want to ask the harder question, is how do you do what he did in a more authentic, less manipulative way without having to exercise or overuse perhaps the control lever?
Yeah.
Because the thing that made sense for me with him was that he kind of had to step outside his family system and judge them, and then work to fix things. And it achieved a measure of improvement. And like, that was a worthwhile, but to me, that's a heroic thing, not a normal thing.
Yes, heroic is also somewhat questionable. I suppose it's also why you don't therapize your own family, because having the outside opinion is actually useful for having someone who isn't emotionally enmeshed.
Right, like I get that, right? But this is the thing that I've been working on, is that the thing for me about Christing is that it's deeply incarnational, and it surrenders the power position. And that is a counter to the traditional thing. Now, to be fair, I feel like so this I guess is maybe the way that I would frame it. It's like Bowen did a lot of Christing, but he also did a bit of bossing as well. And I think it's safe to say that when people feel some discomfort reading about Bowen, and when his family members, heard about this story, they felt some discomfort. And I think that discomfort was legitimate, even though I think he did the best he could with the circumstances he had. And so the question is really how to iterate on what Bowen did and what he taught, so that we can, because in some circumstances, that level of bossing would actually destroy the relationship, right? If people found out about that, it could easily, and in the context I am in, if I tried to inhabit that role, it would destroy the relationship, no question about it. And so I have to find a more subtle, more refined version of that in my practice.
So that's why you want to look at David Schnarch.
This is not a name I don't think I've heard before.
His name is amazing.
How do you spell it?
It's SCHNAR.
NAR?
Yep, CH. And he does marriage therapy, because obviously marriage is really good at finding tension. And he has created crucible theories about marriage, and how he uses the basis of differentiation as, there you go, as part of Bowen's original work, but then iterates on it. And for him, it very much is about being able to identify with your own intrinsic values and beliefs, and own your emotions, and own your own feelings before you then interact with someone else. So it's standing on your own 2 feet and not expecting someone else to make you feel better. And the problem that you have with your friend is that they are coming to you expecting you to make them feel better by agreeing with their
anger.
Yeah. And actually, that's not a helpful position to be in for them or for you.
Right. I mean, it's tactically a good relief, but a horrible long-term strategy.
Well, it's not even that great a relief. It sounds good in the moment.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
It might briefly make you feel good until you speak to the other person.
Well, but the essence of modern politics is we never speak to the other person, so we can feel good for a very long time.
Well, don't get me started on modern politics and how.
No, let's get started. This is very much on point, right? Like, this is my analysis of what is wrong with modern politics, is that we have centered our identity on this triangulation, and getting to a place where you can encounter people in a way, and actually this is the interesting thing I haven't worked in here yet, but I had a very good inflection point with my therapist on Wednesday where we kind of hit a point where like, okay, I feel like I've gotten some clear answers to the things that brought me here. But we're at a point now, and we've been kind of working here for the last few weeks, was that I feel like the framing of therapist and patient is getting in the way of us actually being more productive. Because we're here, because as a therapist and patient, it's my problems that are on the table and his issues are not supposed to be relevant. But it's like, I feel like the thing that's making it hard for you to help me is your issues that I can help you with. And so can we reframe this relationship as something more symmetric? So we're gonna meet for coffee in a week and continue the conversation, but not continue the patient-client relationship. And precisely because of this thing is that when you're in this position of power of the boss, you know, it's like being a dad with my son, especially, who's 13 years old and very bright and very verbal. I've had the most productive sessions with him when he is coaching me and telling me what he thinks I'm doing wrong with my my parenting of his sister and things like that. And you know, I can't change the fact that I'm his dad. I have to get him out to school in the morning and pay for him and, you know, raise him. But I'm acutely aware that the power position, which is useful for purposes of control and necessary in the parenting context, is also a barrier to intimacy and authenticity.
Well, I would argue that the boss role, as you described it, is always maladaptive.
Oh no, it's very adaptive in terms of a number of things.
Like when?
You have an enemy attacking your village, and you need to get all the soldiers to one point to stop them so that you don't all die.
Okay, so let's go back a step further. Why are they attacking your village?
Because they're raiders from Mongolia who decided they want to move into this area.
Okay, and has there been any kind of attempt at communication with them before now?
They speak a totally different language. They're not interested in peace or relationships. They are purely there to plunder and kill, which was more or less true of most of the Mongolian expansion into the West.
Okay, so what you're doing now is you're taking a modern theory that is dealing with emotional conflict and you're putting it into a physical conflict scenario.
Okay, let me give you a lesser one. Okay, I was at Apple in 1997 with Steve Jobs. Company was 6 months away from bankruptcy.
Yep.
And Steve Jobs said, okay, this is what we have to do to survive as a company. We need to stop picking a fight with Microsoft. We need to drastically simplify our product line, and we need to focus in on a very structured hierarchical process for making great products. And there are people who had been there for good chunks of their careers pursuing their personal dreams, like the Newton organization. And he said, I'm sorry, you're irrelevant. The Newton is irrelevant. We're going to do something else. If you want to be part of that, fine, but I don't care. And in order for Apple to have survived as an entity, it required a massive realignment of the organization around Steve Jobs' vision of who we were. And what we actually wanted was mostly irrelevant. Not entirely, but mostly. And that was, I think, that is what the boss role is for, is to say, in order for this entity to survive, whether it's a physical threat or a financial threat or whatever, you have to be able to make the hard choices, or you won't. And that's why you need a boss.
I've got an alternative for you. Alternative example. When I was a medical student, well, no, not medical student, when I was a first year doctor and I was working on the wards, I had a consultant who was the head of medicine at the hospital, or chief of medicine, you would call him. And so he was like really high powered. And when he came on the wards, he would come and be softly spoken, gentle, empathetic. He would speak to the nurses like they were equals. He would walk in and ask us about the patients that we'd seen. He always used the patient's name, not their bed number. He would ask us what we thought and used it as an opportunity to teach us and help us to grow and develop. If he felt that there was something that we should do differently based on his significantly more experience, he would say, have you thought about this because of these reasons? And because of that, my self-confidence, but my knowledge and my competence improved dramatically. When there was then a medical emergency, like a resuscitation, or, you know, we had to do CPR and that kind of thing, he wouldn't stand there in the emergency and go, right, you do this, you do this, you do this, you do this. He allowed us to take up our roles, and he still didn't override our individuality. He allowed us to form the team ourselves.
Okay, let me. So there's a really interesting phrase you use there. He allowed you to fill your roles.
Yeah.
Did you have roles that were pre-assigned and predetermined or predefined? No. So if someone said, like a junior resident said, oh, I want to run the anesthesia now, that would have been, even if they've never run anesthesia before, would that have been an appropriate action?
No, and he would have said something.
So they would have, so he would have said something.
Yeah.
Right.
Because he had the responsibility, but it's not about railroading everyone else.
So let's talk about this then. Railroading is a strong term. De-individuating is a more nuanced term.
Still sounds very negative.
Well, let me put it, but de-individuating says that in this context, I expect you to fulfill this role because of the expectations everyone else has for you in that role. So can you give me an example, give an example of a resuscitation which has more than 3 roles? Can you give me an example of what the roles are?
Oh yeah, you've got the person who's doing the oxygen bag and mask.
Okay.
You've got the person who's doing the chest compressions.
Okay.
You've got the person manning the defibrillator.
Mm-hmm.
You've got the consultant or the head, the lead, whoever is running it, overseeing. Mm-hmm. And then you've got the person that's putting cannulas in the blood veins, or blood vessels, and making sure you've got venous access.
Now, did you ever have a context where the person who was trying to fill that role was not competent to do it?
Yes.
Okay, and what would happen then?
So the consultant would probably say to the person who was doing it, would you be able to switch and help the person doing compressions? So compressions is generally the least skillful role.
Okay, so what if this person said, no, I really want to do this, but they were clearly incompetent? What would the consultant do?
So at that point, the person is no longer acting as part of the group.
Exactly. They're refusing to fulfill the appropriate role that they need for the group to function.
And at that point, they are acting maladaptively.
Yes.
In which case, and they're no longer obeying the authority of the lead of the resuscitation. For the sake of argument, I'm going to say consultant because it's just easier than me thinking. Sure, it doesn't have to be. Yeah. I ran it myself a few times, so it can be someone junior, but fine. So if the consultant has their authority questioned, then they have to assert their authority in order to ensure that the group
fulfills its purpose.
Has a coherent structure.
Right, and the coherent structure is defined as everyone fulfilling the roles that are necessary for the group to achieve its purpose.
Yes.
But if he says like, I've always wanted to have this role, it's like, I'm sorry, you're not yet competent to fulfill that role. You have to draw a line. Or in the case where like, oh, by the way, for this procedure, there is no bagman pushing the oxygen mask. It doesn't matter if you liked doing that or you really were good at it. In order to achieve this role, we can't have someone fulfilling that role, right? It doesn't matter what you want. What matters is, are you fulfilling the role required of the system? That's what I mean by de-individuating. Not depersonalizing, but de-individuating. You are measured in this context by the role you fulfill for the system. That's what I mean by de-individuating.
But that's not something that the individual does. That's something that the system requires.
Well, that's what. But this is a fascinating conversation. We'll have to wrap up here, I know, because you only have 7 minutes. But a useful framing that I have heard that helped me understand this is they talk about a wartime versus a peacetime leader. And this applies to the military level, the political level, and at the business level, and even in a medical scenario, right? So a peacetime leader is one in a context where the existing roles are adaptive. Everyone has a shared cultural understanding of what the roles are and what you're supposed to do and what's expected of you. And the peacetime leader can be a wonderful human being.
And you can take the time to teach someone who isn't able to fulfill the role. Because
you're not facing existential threats, right? You can do training and culture, right? Like Tim Cook, wonderful peacetime leader, the current head of Apple. Right? Very self-deprecating, very, he's very decisive, but he's not, he like worries about raising benefits and celebrating values and all these things. Steve Jobs was a wartime leader. And by definition, a wartime leader means that you're facing an existential threat which your existing roles are not adapted to. And therefore, you have to shove people around into different roles in a fairly urgent fashion in order to ensure that the organism fulfills its purpose. And I go through this agony every morning getting my kids out the door to go to school. Because there's this complex series of interactions where if my son does not get up at this time, then he doesn't get down by this time, then my wife can't take him to school at time, or else she'll be late for work. And if I take him instead, then I'll be late for my work. And it's like, okay, when I'm in boss mode, I don't care what you're feeling. I have to make sure that you get your thing done so that the rest of us can function. Otherwise, the whole organism is thrown off for the rest of the day. And, there is an escape clause that's like, okay, if he's really feeling sick or if he's got, COVID symptoms that means I was like, okay, then we pull the escape cord, we decouple from that system and go into a different mode where we sacrifice that purpose for the sake of a higher purpose. And that's being humane. And even Steve Jobs would have moments where he would actually interact with people at a human level. They were rare, but people treasured them. But it was okay because there's a whole bunch of stories about Steve Jobs. But the thing that was weird that people don't always understand is that he was never, in his second incarnation, he was never gratuitously cruel. He was just intensely focused on what he worshipped, which was design and Apple in service of design. And because of that, he had a bizarre lack of ego, which is a really strange thing to say about Steve Jobs. But in that, like, anyone in the company could go up to Steve Jobs anytime and say, you're wrong and here's why. And if you actually had thought it through and were doing it seriously, he would respect you for it. He may or may not agree, but he would respect you. If you just picked a fight with him to kind of show how smart ass you were, lightning would fall from the skies and you would be consumed on the spot. But the thing that people don't often realize about this is that having that dominant alpha male rigor created an enormous sense of personal freedom because everyone lived in the fear of God. and you knew that they wouldn't let their individuality get in the way of the job. So when I was a product manager for 15 years at Apple, I could count the number of political problems I had on the fingers of one hand and have a few left over.
Yeah.
Okay, 15 years at a high-tech company under a high-stress environment, hardly any political problems because of the de-individuation, which left me woefully unprepared for normal corporate life after I left Apple.
Yeah.
You know, and so that's why the boss role is adaptive.
So the question I will ask you then is, do you think that war creates mentally healthy people, emotionally healthy people?
And the funny thing is, and I will answer with another question. Does coaching create mentally healthy athletes? Olympic level coaching.
Coach.
What? Olympic level coaching, does it create mentally well-balanced athletes?
No.
And yet it creates extraordinary performance.
And
but
you're
this is a hard question, which might be a great place for us to pick up on next time. Yeah. Because that is the reason I left Apple, is to ask the question, is it possible, or at least in which context, is it possible to marry high performance and emotional health? Because it's easy to have everyone happy if you don't care about achieving a certain goal.
Yeah, but I would argue that being entirely focused on achieving the goal is an attempt to relieve the tension rather than focusing on the process.
Well, the point is that there is a series of tensions, right? There's the tension of wanting everyone to feel good and the tension of wanting to get the job done. And there's a tension between those two. Yes, one could, so I share with you the desire for there to be something better. I am wrestling with what does that actually look like? And that is precisely the conversation we are trying to have. So far, so good. Thank you. Let Bill come in for the last 10 seconds before you disappear, but he and I can chat for a few minutes if he wants to debrief.
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Got through 4 slides.
Yeah, I'm happy. I'll send you an article. I'll send you an article about, in the headlines, Apple employees taking a revisionist stance on the kind of Apple experience you described. So the high-tech people here are revolting, and they're not happy with individualizing. So we'll see what happens 5 years from now.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like I said, like it's necessary to have a Tim Cook after a Steve Jobs because these cycles are excruciating. And like all my friends at Apple, I said Apple's become like we are, a little bit pudgy and middle-aged and a little slower moving. And that's probably
no. They're saying you know they're just tired of being told to not talk, you know, and this and that, and it's
so you can argue that they're not relaxing enough and being more humane. And the people who complain that Apple is too wimpy, it's not. But like, you know, this is not an easy question to answer until you have a clear sense of what the purpose is. And
I have to go, I'm afraid.
Yes, you can go, Bob. Bill and I will chat for a bit. Thank you so much, Kate. We'll schedule something for a few days from now.
Sounds good. All right.
All right. Thank you. Bye. Bill, you want to show your face so we can have this discussion?
I do have to go as well.
Okay.
So I'm really happy with listening. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm just saying it's a hard problem, and I can totally understand it's legitimate on both sides, and then resolving that, it gets to this really deeper, harder question of purpose.
Have you had any progress with high achievement and being emotionally?
Well, Project Aristotle, of course, is the canonical answer to that question these days, right? The psychological safety is critical for high performance teams, but you know, right after that is mission alignment, right? And one of the interesting things that I've run into in this space is that mission alignment and high performance and psychological safety are in tension. And it really gets down to how do people identify themselves? Right, so in a Silicon Valley company where the first order you identify with your job, and as long as all you want is to do good at your job, then psychological safety and mission alignment are nearly perfect. But then once you start becoming more holistic, you start worrying about defense contractors, contracts, or you start worrying about work-life balance, suddenly mission alignment and psychological safety are in tension. And at least for most, and even in the church, you and I know, right, that keeping the church running as a mission is in tension to, treating people respectfully. Or conversely, having people like you is in tension with speaking the truth to them. And these are hard, interesting problems, which I do not claim to be able to solve in this space, but I'm hoping to be able to at least define them more precisely so that people can iterate towards solutions rather than just randomly walking.
Yeah, that's good. Can you capture some of this, or I'll re-listen to it, because I think this is some new, I mean, not new material, but kind of that focus that Kate was looking for. It's interesting and relevant to Silicon Valley.